Hey there, and welcome to my first ever Despicable Me video. And recently, I went to see the second Minions film, Minions, The Rise of Gru. And I'll be honest, coming into it, I wasn't hyped. For years, I was one of those people who had an irrational hatred for Despicable Me, and in particular, Minions. There was nothing redeeming about them, nothing funny. I was determined to hate them. They were everything that was wrong with cinema today. Everything that was wrong with the world. My dramatic teenage mind could never understand why anyone would like them. Even children. Surely they couldn't be so stupid, I would say. And you know what the best part of all of this was? I'd never even seen it before. I was in my premium angsty teen phase, and thus I thought, I never have to see these stupid films to judge them. And then of course at some point, I was told to pull my head out of my ass, and I actually sat down to watch them, and it was one of those light bulb moments where I just went, oh, I get it now. Whoopsie. And so now, I do enjoy the films. Are they all-time greats that have changed cinema forever? No. Are they fun films that you shouldn't take too seriously and just go along for the ride? Hell yeah. They're stupid. And they lean heavily on absurd jokes and toilet humour. And since that's a style that started to sort of go out of fashion a little bit during the 2010s, they almost feel like a bit of a throwback to that early 2000s Shrek vibe. And the latest film, Minions 2, is really no different. It conforms to this general trend. Light entertainment that you don't need to take too seriously, and you can enjoy it for what it is. But anyway though, I do realise the film hasn't actually released in the United States yet, so I'll do a very brief, non-spoiler review for anybody that doesn't want to know the plot beforehand. Not that it's really all that unique a story, but I can still understand. Minions, The Rise of Gru, is set during the 1970s, a couple of years after the events of the first Minions, where a 12-year-old Gru is growing up in suburban America. A fanboy of a team of supervillains known as the Vicious Six, Gru wants nothing more than to join them and carve out a career as a supervillain alongside them, even sending out an application after they betray their leader, Wild Knuckles. And of course, Gru being Gru, his life is never easy, and it all goes wrong. And eventually, he finds himself hunted by the Six, as well as kidnapped by Wild Knuckles himself, forming a bond with him along the way as his minions hatch a desperate plan to rescue him and try to save the day themselves. So yeah, that's the spoiler-free version, or mostly spoiler-free synopsis of the film. And like I said before, it's a fine movie. Nothing revolutionary, but it does what it needs to do. It's entertaining, it's fun, it makes kids laugh, all the good stuff. If these kind of films interest you, then go see it. I doubt you'll regret it, and I think it's honestly better than most of the recent installments of the franchise. So yeah, there you go. Non-spoiler version of the video. If you haven't seen the film, and you do care enough not to be spoiled, this is your stop. See you later. But if you have seen it, or you don't care about spoilers, let's get into it. So yeah, returning to my excellent and truly vivid synopsis, let's expand a little bit more on what the actual story is. The film, despite the title of Minions, actually mostly just follows Gru, with the Minions as more of a side story. After Wild Knuckles is betrayed by the Vicious Six after stealing the precious Zodiac Stone, which allows the user to empower people with the spirits of the Chinese Zodiac, Gru decides that he wants to apply for a job as the newest member of the group. But after realizing he's just a child, they laugh him out of the interview and bring in the next applicant. Upset by the rejection, Gru decides to steal the Zodiac Stone from under their noses as he believes this would impress them and convince them to give him the position. But unfortunately for him, it just pisses them off. And he gets kidnapped by Wild Knuckles, who's also out seeking revenge for getting betrayed during the opening heist. And so, Gru finds himself held hostage by his all-time favourite villain, whilst the three main minions hatch a crackpot scheme to free him, and the rest of the Vicious Six go about trying to hunt them all down. Whilst they continue their hunt, however, Gru and Knuckles form an unlikely partnership of sorts, with Knuckles mentoring him in the best way to become a distinguished villain, whilst Bob, Stuart and Kevin find themselves walking the path of the Kung Fu Master with the help of a local massage therapist, trying to learn the skills necessary to rescue and protect Gru. And honestly, that whole section of the story is just so irrelevant to the plot and was clearly just there to give the minions something funny to do, but I really enjoyed it. Eventually though, all these storylines come to a head as the three main minions reunite with Gru, just as the Vicious Six get the Zodiac Stone back and use it to transform everybody into different Zodiac animals for a dramatic final confrontation, which of course ends with Gru and his team coming out with the win and Wild Knuckles driving off into the sunset scot-free after faking his death. potentially setting him and Gru up for even more adventures together if they continue with the prequel series in the future. And honestly, they most likely will, as these things just seem to attract money like a goddamn magnet. So yeah, that's the bare bones plot. And if it kind of sounds hokey and stupid, that's because it is hokey and stupid. Very nonsensical. A masterpiece of writing. This thing is not. The story is haphazard. But I think that's part of the appeal of the franchise to begin with. This isn't Pixar. We're not here expecting this is going to be some massively moving and emotional story. It's probably not going to have those deeper themes that seem to be a lot more common in animated works in today's day and age. Yeah, maybe there are some overarching themes, but nothing that really makes you take a step back and think about the cinematic experience after you've left the cinema. And that's okay. Not everything needs to be like that. If everything's made in the same way, then nothing feels unique anymore. And honestly, if everything's overly emotional, even kids' animated films, it's just exhausting. These type of films and stories fill a certain role, and they should be celebrated for that. They should be judged via a different set of standards, because they're not the same. They're not even close. You wouldn't go to an MCU film and expect to see an art house extravaganza, and you don't go to see Fast and Furious to see a grand Broadway musical put to screen. Every genre and subgenre has its own set of standards it should be judged by. And obviously there's going to be overlap in each category, but the finer details and requirements, as well as what the audience wants out of each film, varies from movie to movie, genre to genre. And so for the type of film that Minions 2 is, the plot is kind of secondary to the characters and the humour. Gru and the Minions is what draws you in. The characters, the mannerisms, the way they speak and act, the reactions and their lines. That's what Despicable Me and Minions brings to the table. And I think from a character point of view, Gru and the Minions before this film were in real risk of becoming Flanderized. Really heavily Flanderized. It's like the writers went to see the first two films in cinema, saw what jokes got the most laughs, and just played them on repeat in various different scenarios. And so the characters ended up getting stale and became tired caricatures using the same recycled jokes. But I think this film managed to pull away from that. On one hand, Gru felt far fresher, maybe because they had to write him as a kid and thus he's less cynical, but even his silliness is far more toned down. He feels like a more natural character rather than a walking punchline. And it's the same with the Minions. Despite being mega popular and a massive draw for audiences, I think they really did start to lose their charm and appeal due to overexposure. They were getting too much screen time and their jokes were becoming a bit tired, a bit samey, hit or miss. The laughs were drying up. But I think this film kind of brings them back to basics and gave them a new lease on life. They were funnier. Their jokes landed more. They felt fresh and unique. And I think it all came down to screen time. They had less of it, and their impact on the main plot was way more reduced. They had their own side story, but it didn't take up too much time. A strange kung fu story where they train with an old lady to get rudimentary skills they need to help Gru. And then there's another minion that cycles all the way to San Francisco in order to retrieve the Zodiac Stone and help Gru, only to end up losing it. And this is really all they had to do to make them more palatable. Reduce their screen time to make their absurd humour, their fart jokes, and their random acts of very extreme violence all the funnier and less oversaturated. Hell, I'd say the only real dark spot in terms of character work was actually the villains, ironically. And by that I mean the Vicious Six, and they were largely absent from the film itself and had no real story or motivation. It was almost all from the hero POV. And that's okay, but it definitely made you not care about the villains almost at all. They were just characters for the heroes to beat up. But in previous films, you actually spent more time with villains. You saw their personalities, you had them shine. Here, it just didn't happen. And then in fact, they have like 5 different villains at once, and it gets very crowded and no one develops. But yeah, like I said, that's the only real dark spot for character work and development in the film. Otherwise, the story is decent. All the different narrative arcs are fun and work well in conjunction with each other. The jokes are solid. Nobody gets overexposed and thus becomes a bit old and haggard. The animation was good. I mean, it was nothing massively revolutionary like Lightyear, but it's a completely different style, so that's okay. The 70s references were fun to see, and best of all, it didn't drag. It was well paced and it didn't overstay its welcome or linger on any one storyline too long. And so, whilst I don't think it's going to be winning the Oscar for Best Animated Picture, it's one of those movies I would actually recommend you see, simply because it'd make you smile. Who doesn't like to smile? But anyway, with all that being said, these are just my opinions, and now I'd like to hear yours. For those of you who have seen the film, what do you think? You like it, hate it? Agree, disagree? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know.